US President Joe Biden tells his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping he has concerns over human rights abuses and warns against unilateral moves to change the status of Taiwan. Xi warns Biden that stoking Taiwan's independence is playing with fire. Belarus's leader Lukashenko says he wants to avoid confrontation over migrants after the EU decides to widen sanctions. The situation at the border worsens as Polish forces fire tear gas after migrants resorted to stone pelting along the border. Several outbreaks of bird flu in Europe and Asia have been reported in recent days, putting the poultry industry on alert after previous episodes led to the culling of tens of millions of birds. The military strongman of eastern Libya, Khalifa Haftar, a controversial figure, announces he will run for the post of president in elections scheduled for December the 24th. Myanmar's junta charges ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi with alleged electoral fraud during 2020 polls that her party won in a landslide. And European champions Italy are in danger of missing out on a second consecutive FIFA World Cup after a draw against Northern Ireland sends them into the playoffs. England qualify for Qatar 2022 after a 10-0 thrashing of San Marino. Consecutive FIFA World Cup after a draw against Northern Ireland sends them into the playoffs. England qualify for Qatar 2022 after a 10-0 thrashing of San Marino.
He's a remarkable guy.
In virtual talks that lasted for nearly 4 hours, US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping sought a reset in ties. They both urged open communication and friendly competition between the two countries. On Taiwan, President Biden tried to strike a balancing act, saying the US maintains its long-standing policy of recognizing the One China policy, guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, but he also said the US opposes any unilateral efforts to change the status quo of Taiwan. Chinese state media reported that President Xi warned the US against crossing the red line of Taiwan, which Beijing claims as its own. Xi Jinping also said that support for Taiwanese independence is like playing with fire. President Biden brought up concerns over human rights violations by China in Xinjiang, Tibet and Hong Kong, and discussed the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. He said American industries need to be protected from China's trade and economic practices.
It seems to me we need to establish some common sense guardrails to be clear and honest where we disagree and work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change. None of this is a favor to either of our countries, what we do for one another, but it's just responsible world leadership, and you're a major world leader, and so is the United States. How our bilateral relationship evolves seems to me to will have a profound impact not only on our countries, but quite frankly, the rest of the world. We have a responsibility to the world as well as to our people.
President Xi, on his part, called for greater cooperation and communication between the two sides.
Right now, both China and the United States are at critical stages of development, and humanity lives in a global village, and we face multiple challenges together. As the world's two largest economies and the permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and the United States need to increase communication and cooperation. We should each run our domestic affairs well and, at the same time, shoulder our share of international responsibilities and work together to advance the noble cause of world peace and development. This is a shared desire of the people of our two countries and around the world, and the joint mission of Chinese and American leaders.
The two leaders have spoken before, twice on the phone, since President Biden took office. With President Xi not currently travelling abroad due to the ongoing pandemic, in-person talks have not yet been possible. Now, while thousands remain stranded in freezing temperatures at the Poland-Belarus border, Poland now says it has decided to build a wall there. The construction of the structure, planned to stretch 112 miles, will begin from next month. It'll cost Poland an estimated $407 million. The Polish parliament has already given its approval.
What we have been witnessing recently, as you said, is very well orchestrated and prepared by the Belarusian regime operation where the people are instrumentalized. There is a phenomenon of weaponization of migration, but this is a very cynical game of Mr. Lukashenko. But he's also forcing us somehow to lift the sanctions adopted by the European Union. And for that, he's been using the migrants as pawns in this hybrid operation, which is being conducted also at the information level, through the communication channels. So it is a very cynical game where the people are, as I said, used as bullets in this game.
The European Union has vowed to press ahead with fresh sanctions against Belarus's leader Alexander Lukashenko. EU foreign ministers agreed that existing sanctions would be expanded. They will now include individuals and companies found to have encouraged border crossings. The new penalties are expected to target around 30 Belarusian officials, state airline and travel agencies. The United States says it is also preparing new sanctions to hold the Lukashenko government accountable for what it calls the inhumane facilitation of migrant flows.
We are deeply concerned by the Lukashenko regime's inhumane actions, and we strongly condemn their callous exploitation and coercion of vulnerable people and inhumane facilitation of irregular migration flows across its borders. I understand that the EU today announced a new sanctions authority that could apply to the situation in Belarus. We too are preparing follow-up sanctions in close coordination with the EU and other partners and allies that will continue to hold the Lukashenko regime accountable for its ongoing attacks on democracy, on human rights, on international norms.
Belarus forces have been seen channeling the crowd of migrants towards the last line of Polish razor wire, but they were stopped short by a police cordon before they could cross into the European Union. Migrants have been trying to cross from Belarus into the EU for months via Poland. Brussels accuses Minsk of sending migrants to the border as retribution for earlier sanctions. The Polish Defence Ministry released a video that purportedly shows Belarusian forces attempting to compromise the border fence. In his first phone call with a Western leader in months, Lukashenko discussed the crisis with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The two leaders discussed bringing humanitarian aid to the migrants during a joint press briefing of leaders from Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. The Lithuanian president said Brussels had no reason to believe the Lukashenko administration, which is currently testing the unity of the West over the border crisis.
It is totally clear what Lukashenko regime and their allies are seeking: to test the unity of the West. Huge amount of video, photo and other evidence shows armed Lukashenko officers' involvement in coordinating streams of people who came to Belarus.
It's not refugee crisis like in 2015. It's a Belarus and Russia-made hybrid attack for EU.
The suspect behind a car explosion outside a hospital in Liverpool, here in the UK, has been identified by the British police. 32-year-old Imad al-Swalmin was killed in the blast. Why the suspect wanted to go to the hospital or what caused the sudden explosion of the device still remains unclear. Authorities have declared it a terrorist incident, and the UK's national threat level has been raised to severe.
Police in the UK have identified the suspect behind an explosion which occurred outside a hospital in Liverpool on Sunday. Authorities say 32-year-old Imad al-Swalmin, who was killed in the blast, boarded a taxi and asked to be driven to the location. The blast then took within the taxi as it approached the drop-off point outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. The taxi driver was injured in the explosion, but was released after receiving medical attention. Police later declared the event as a terrorist incident, and the country raised its national threat level from substantial to severe. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who chaired a meeting of the government's emergency committee on Monday, said the explosion was a reminder for the public to be vigilant.
But what yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence. And our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
In the meantime, 4 men in their 20s who were arrested in connection with the explosion were released on Monday. Police have also said they are searching 2 places linked to the suspect and have recovered significant items. The explosion occurred just before 11 a.m. on Sunday, when a Remembrance Day service to commemorate war dead was being held at nearby Liverpool Cathedral. Authorities are investigating whether the events are connected. However, it marks the second fatal incident in 1 month after lawmaker David Amess was fatally stabbed in October in the county of Essex.
A worrying trend, that's what the World Organization for Animal Health calls a series of outbreaks of bird flu in Europe and Asia. The poultry industry is on high alert, but in previous outbreaks, tens of millions of birds have had to be culled to prevent transmission. In South Korea, a farm of around 770,000 poultry has reported an outbreak, and all the birds have had to be slaughtered. Japan reported its first outbreak of the 2021 winter season at a farm in the northeast of the country. Norway says it has cases in the Rogaland region in a flock of 7,000 birds. The Belgian government's put the country on increased alert and has ordered poultry to be kept indoors. That's after a variant of bird flu was identified in a wild goose near Antwerp. France and the Netherlands have adopted similar measures.
On n'a aucun autre moyen de lutte, il n'y a pas de vaccin contre la grippe aviaire, il y a des recherches qui sont faites là-dessus, mais aujourd'hui il n'y a pas de vaccin qui soit efficace et commercialisé pour lutter contre la grippe aviaire. Donc oui, j'ai envie de dire, on est obligé de mettre les animaux à l'abri pendant les périodes à risque, quand il y a des migrations. C'est du manque à gagner en fait, tout simplement pour l'entreprise et pour les éleveurs. Parce que vous produisez moins d'animaux, mais en face vous avez des charges de structure qui sont identiques, donc en fait vous perdez de l'argent.
In rare cases, bird flu can also transfer to humans. China has reported 21 cases of avian influenza this year. Outbreaks generally occur in the autumn season, mostly spread by migrating wild birds. Shifting our focus to Myanmar now, the military junta has levelled fresh charges of electoral fraud against ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Charges have been brought against 15 other officials as well, including ex-President U Win Myint and the former Election Commission chief. They all are accused of election fraud and lawless actions during the November 2020 polls, which Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, won in a landslide. According to state media agency Global New Light, 16 people have been charged for alleged violation of a number of electoral laws, including advance voting. On February the 1st, a junta-led coup ousted the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi, triggering widespread protest and mass civil disobedience. Over 1,200 people have reportedly been killed in several military crackdowns since. Aung San Suu Kyi has been in detention since the coup. She continues to face a number of charges, including that of sedition, corruption and illegally obtaining walkie-talkies. The military maintains the power grab was necessary because of the alleged voter fraud. International observers, however, have said the 2020 polls were largely free and fair. Meanwhile, after months of detention, American journalist Danny Fenster has been freed from prison in Myanmar. Fenster flew to Qatar and is on his way back home. Though looking frail, Fenster told reporters on the tarmac in Doha that he felt well and was not beaten or starved while in captivity. The 37-year-old managing editor of the magazine Frontier Myanmar was sentenced to 11 years in prison for incitement and violation of immigration laws.
American journalist Danny Fenster was freed from a Myanmar prison on Monday. His release follows negotiations between former U.S. diplomat Bill Richardson and Myanmar's ruling military junta. On his way home, Fenster, the managing editor of independent online magazine Frontier Myanmar, looked frail when making a stop in Doha, Qatar, with Richardson by his side. Asked if he had been mistreated, Fenster said this.
I was arrested and held in captivity for no reason, so I suppose so. But physically I was healthy. I wasn't starved or beaten.
Fenster was sentenced to 11 years in prison on Friday for incitement and violations of laws on immigration and unlawful assembly, a ruling that drew international condemnation. He was among dozens of journalists detained in Myanmar since a February 1st military coup that put an abrupt end to a decade of tentative steps towards democracy. Richardson, a former congressman and governor of New Mexico, said efforts to work with the Myanmar government on humanitarian assistance, including on vaccines, led to Fenster's release. A military-owned TV network on Monday said he had been freed on, quote, humanitarian grounds at the request of Richardson and representatives from two Japanese organizations. A source familiar with Richardson's trip said it was arranged without knowledge of the State Department or the U.S. Embassy in Yangon. A State Department spokesman did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Monday, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken commended U.S. officials as well as Richardson for facilitating Fenster's release.
Next to Ethiopia, where Tigrayan forces continue to take territory, experts say rebel troops are poised to seize the country's main trade route known as the Djibouti corridor. That would put immense economic pressure on Ethiopia's government in Addis Ababa. Tigrayan forces have already captured the key cities of Dessie and Kombolcha.
I guess 10 days ago now they took control of Dessie and Kombolcha cities, two major Amhara cities, and that put them in another significant advance, and that's about 400 kilometers from Addis Ababa. And it looks like the Tigray leadership's next ambitions are either to try and take control of the Djibouti corridor, Ethiopia's main trade route. That would allow them to exert significant economic pressure on Addis Ababa and the federal government.
Well, in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian government is cracking down on Tigrayans in the city. According to the Associated Press, thousands of Tigrayans have been detained. The government's ordered landlords to register the identities of their tenants with the police. There are also reports of groups moving around the streets looking for Tigrayans to report. The government says it's detaining people suspected of supporting forces from the Tigray region, but human rights groups say the detentions appear to be on the basis of ethnicity. And the Associated Press says some US and British citizens have been caught up in the detentions.
ሁሉም ትግርኛ ተናጋሪ እንደ ቲፒኤልኤፍ ደጋፊ ወይ የሱ መረጃ አስተላላፊ እንደሆንክ እንደዛ ተብሎ ነው ሰርቶ የሚበላ ተራ ዝም ብሎ ኮንስትራክሽን ሰርቶ የሚበላ ቡና የምታፈላ በቃ እንደዛ ታይቶ ነው የሚታየው። እዚህ ራሱ ትግርኛ ማውራቱ እዚህ እየከበደን ነው ቋንቋችን መናገር እና በጣም ተቸግረን ነው ያለነው። ቤት እየዋልን ነው አሁን መውጣት አልቻልንም። በአሁኑ ሰዓት ደግሞ የአስቸኳይ ጊዜ አዋጅ ተብሎ የባሰ ያለምንም ምክንያት ዝም ብሎ ማጎር ነው። ወዴት እንደሚወስድ አይታወቅም።
The United States has again urged all US nationals to leave the country immediately, warning there will not be an Afghanistan-style military evacuation from the country if the situation worsens any further. The conflict between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front started last year. Since then, it's killed thousands and displaced over 2 million people. The civil war has led to claims of human rights abuses committed by both sides. And before we disappear, November the 13th, 2021 marks 20 years since the release of the film Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. One of the very first props to be designed was Harry's acceptance letter from Hogwarts, the School of Wizards.
Is it a bit too reflective right now?
The very first prop that I got to design on the Philosopher's Stone and the whole series. So rather naively thinking that it would just be one simple envelope, of course, we required many.
I think the letter is such like a symbol of this world that we are entering through that letter. And so I think everyone in Harry Potter, all the fans of Harry Potter, they're hoping for. And everyone is waiting for one. No, I'm still waiting for one. No, actually, I received one.
Have you? Did you get yours?
One, yes, actually.
I think the first two things we talked about was broomstick flying and floating candles. And obviously this was 21 years ago. CGI wasn't quite where it is today. And we wanted to get as much reality into everything we did. And Chris was really up for that. And I think it's why those first films have got so much reality to them and to the magic, because everything we could do in camera, we did.
It's not real, the ceiling. It's just bewitched to look like the night sky. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history.
You know, JK's books were fabulous and so rich in their content, and and for us, were many things in the books which were sort of so beloved of that time. Looked like huge challenges. Quidditch. How do you do Quidditch? How do you fly people around on broomsticks to play a game? With chasing a ball and they're 40 feet in the air and they're children. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges.
20 years makes you feel old. Thanks very much indeed for watching. I've been Ollie Barrett. Do stay with WION World is One.
many other. This is right, Arab.